equity jurisprudence came about in England as a alternative to common law, which was a more fair and just way to deal with certain issues, where common law always went to property. They call it in rem, and then equity could speak to the conscience, to the person, and speak to performance and behavior, rather than just property or your stuff.
There's a lot of people that just come to us proactively, just wanting to have a remedy if something ever arises, and that's great. And there's a lot of people that come to us when they are in the midst of the refiner's fire, and they're burning away. They have no idea what to do, and even in those situations, we can help pull somebody out of the fire, and not lose who they were meant to be in the midst of all this attack and fear and stress. You can find conditional acceptance in UCC Article 2. Our class more gets into UCC Articles 3 and 9, where you just accept on whatever it is, and you actually have the inherent ability to, it doesn't matter how much they're saying you owe, you can transmute that into an obligation on their part to settle and close the accounting in the matter.
I do a lot of research like you guys, and of course, if you spend time on YouTube, you run into all these so-called sovereign citizen in court videos, and I don't know to what extent they're real or not, but I just thought it would be worth pointing out for people who are watching that what we're teaching here, or what's being taught, has no resemblance whatsoever to pretty much almost everything that is labeled so-called sovereign citizen in court.
It looks very different when we go to court. We're not yelling at the judge or citing laws or anything. We're just acting in full commercial honor, and we actually tend to get treated very well by judges. We're all taught to either fight or comply. Those are pretty much the only two options that we're given. But equity jurisprudence is actually the only jurisdiction of law that's fully modeled off of the Bible. I had just gotten fired from my job for not taking the vaccine, and it was right before Christmas of 2021. We spent our last $5,000 we had in the world on this equity class because I just knew that there was something about it. We discharged a couple of credit cards, an IRS issue, and we won the very first case we took on for somebody else. We start out as voluntary sureties. You have the contracts with the state, from the moment you're born, and it just gets worse and worse throughout your life. You're taking on debts left and right. Everything we do seems to bring us into more debt. A lot of people feel like we're enslaved in these contracts from 1933. So now we're all considered, commercially speaking, enemies, which is why all of our activity in the world has to be licensed. And so hunting, fishing, even marriage, driving on the road, it's all licensed now, and it stems from the war powers. So they have a very high calling to defend that information. The court is a bank. You can look up the word bank in Blacks and find that out. The judge is just a banker at the end of the day, and he has a job to protect the emergency.
Equity makes us equal with the judge. They're not over us, no matter what culture you're in, what part of the world you're in, what religion you are. It doesn't matter. Every single human being feels fear. We all have fear about something, and that fear unites us. And what we've discovered is a way to walk through that fear. There's a remedy for it, and there's a way to stand, and there's a way to understand your identity, and that, God's standing there with you.
Well, this is great. This is exciting to be here in Nashville. Thank you so much, guys, for joining me today.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here on Music Row in Nashville, where so much history has been made. We're going to make some history of our own.
Yep. Speaking of history, this is the first time that we're doing a live interview. And of course, I'm here today with Julian and Margaret Swan of Standing on the Rock. And we've got some really interesting topics to dive in today. So how are you guys feeling?
Fantastic.
Fantastic.
Happy to be here.
Yes, very much.
Yeah.
So when we approach these kind of topics, it's interesting to think, like, how do we start with this? So I thought it would be great if we could start with a question. How did this all come about? How did you guys come to be full-time educators in equity and trust systems? Maybe share a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, it all started in the fake virus years. There's just so much going on, so much evil spreading in the world. And I just knew that there had to be a better way to stand on our rights and to do so without getting locked into arguing and fighting, being antagonistic with the authorities. So we were just looking for something that was founded on God's word. Maggie started searching for...
I was like searching on YouTube for God and law.
Yeah. And we came across an equity jurisprudence class, and basically just teaching how to stand up for yourself without, having to contend and argue and fight. And just resonated with us in a very deep way. We actually... I had just gotten fired from my job for not taking the vaccine, and it was right before Christmas of 2021. So we had to figure something out. We spent our last $5,000 we had in the world on this equity class because I just knew that there was something about it. We got rolling with it. We discharged a couple of credit cards, an IRS issue, and felt like it was time to start teaching others. And we won the very first case we took on for somebody else. It was a woman in New Jersey who didn't want to vaccinate her dogs, and they were going to take the dogs away. And she was doing all sorts of it's like pre-1933 equity kind of stuff, and wasn't really working for a court case. We taught her how to come out of that and update it to the modern era, and won the case. Dogs are healthy and happy to this day. And it's just been a wild ride ever since then.
I would say too that, Julian knew right away that, this was something he wanted to do and pour himself into. And, we didn't really know where the students were going to come from and the people, but, he did a presentation for a Telegram group, and we were just thinking, oh, it'd be great if even 5 people, sign up. That would be wonderful. He was still working full time, and then over 25 people signed up for the first class. And
I realized I had to quit my engineering job because I was getting too busy to work.
Yeah. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Amazing. One thing you guys mentioned that really struck me is this idea of standing up for your rights without arguing. This may sound surprising to a lot of people. Can you maybe speak to that concept where, let's face it, most people think you either acquiesce or you fight. And so we kind of have these two polar extremes. So what is this notion of standing up for yourself without arguing? Maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Like you said, we're all taught to either fight or comply. Those are pretty much the only two options that we're given. But equity jurisprudence is actually the only jurisdiction of law that's fully modeled off of the Bible. And so we take the example of Jesus. He was silent before his accusers. He asked many questions of the Pharisees. He modeled the example of the sort of authority that comes from a soft power that says a lot more in questions that can ever be said in a shouting match, and it just speaks to the idea that, we're kind of made to bring ourselves into deep dishonor in this culture. We start out as voluntary sureties, you have the contracts with the state, from the moment you're born, and it just gets worse and worse throughout your life. You're taking on debts left and right. Everything we do seems to bring us into more debt, more suretyship. And this gives us a way to kind of transmute all of those things without having to fight and argue about our rights. A lot of people feel like we're enslaved in these contracts, but the truth is that we actually have an incredible amount of power in them, and equity helps us access that power without falling into the traps of arguing and fighting and creating controversy.
I think that equity, the things that we learn in the class, when we base everything on original source material from their sources, and we kind of teach people who they really are, what their identity is in this world, through God, through what's based in the Bible, and then through equity jurisprudence. And so they can internalize this information, and they know they learn what their rights are and what they can stand on. That's why we call it standing on the rock, because we're standing on a firm foundation, and we teach people how to do that in any situation that they're in, so they don't have to practice for different situations. They learn whatever authority figure or courtroom or anyone that's coming after them, they know how to stand, and they know how to ask the questions that compel performance. And that's really what equity is all about.
Yeah, a big part of the class is just repentance and forgiveness. It goes a long way. Very powerful tools that we've been given through Scripture. And repentance actually comes from the Greek word metanoia, which is where we get the word metamorphosis. It doesn't mean to say you're sorry for your sins. Remorse is not the same thing as repentance. Repentance is a metamorphosis, a transformation. You're in this place where you have been, traumatized or acting in a fear-based mentality, a scarcity mentality. You're separated from God. You don't know who you really are, and you have this kind of enlightenment moment, this kairos moment, where you turn away from all of that and begin to walk in your true identity with God and set forth on a new path. That's really what it means to repent. And the idea of sin, it comes from the Greek word hamartia, which a lot of people say is, missing the mark, which, it does come from an archery term. But another way of interpreting that word is, ha is a negation and martia is like a form. So it's really being without form. It's like you've lost your true identity. You're formless in the world. And so you repent of your sin. You turn away from, what's been put on you by your parents, your family, the culture, somebody that, said something to you as a child and it stuck with you in a bad way.
A false identity.
A false identity. You turn away from it and you begin to walk in, your true purpose, your true calling in God and who He made you to be. And, equity is just the way that we found to help protect ourselves, through that process, as we're being assailed in so many ways by the culture, the debt collectors. Some people come to us with, in the worst positions they've ever been in their lives, criminal cases, and we can turn the whole thing around with equity without ever raising a fist against anybody.
Yes.
And it seems like even in private family matters, this is going to be really important. If we go back to this idea of not arguing, isn't the stereotype of the family argument and the family feud kind of very prevalent? And doesn't it seem like in many ways the society is trying to encourage people to argue with each other, and yet ironically that's probably not going to be very helpful for creating robust relationships over time? What do you think?
Julian mentioned, an important part of the class too is forgiveness. And I think a lot of people have a mistaken idea about forgiveness too and see it as a weakness, like, oh, well, that person doesn't deserve my forgiveness. They did something wrong to me. But, we look at it in kind of a different way, and in terms of a debt and kind of commercial terms. And so if we don't release them from that debt, then it just keeps continuing on. So that's one way to look at it. Another way is that forgiveness is a kind of technology that Jesus brought to us. And technology means, something that everyone can use, that makes things better for your life in some way, and that can actually change the environment or the context of what you're doing. So forgiveness does all of those things. and it changes the way you feel. It's for you. It's not for the other person. It's for you. And when you walk in forgiveness, it makes your life better and it changes things. And we've seen it time and time again. So, and that's so important in a family. Like those are usually the people you most need to forgive,
Right.
because most people have been most hurt by family. So, it's important to walk in that.
Yeah. Yeah. And forgiveness, when somebody's faced with, having to forgive, they feel like the other person owes them a debt, and the only way to settle it is to make them pay back. But with forgiveness, you actually absorb the cost. You take it in on yourself. And we like to think of it as the way, cells absorb nutrients. Like you're not just absorbing something bad and have to carry it around forever. You're actually absorbing it, breaking it down, transmuting it into something that you can use to fuel yourself and actually push yourself higher than you were before. And that's really what forgiveness does. It's a powerful, transformative technology.
Yes.
Why is this knowledge not more widely known?
Oh, that's a good question. I suppose because it's profitable for it to be suppressed. It did take the better part of 100 years for people to figure it out. I mean, there was negotiable instruments have been around for a long, long time. They were officially formalized in most of the Western world in the late 1800s through the Bills of Exchange Acts. America never got its own Bill of Exchange Act, but we did do some with that in the 1913 Federal Reserve Act. And but really, it all changed in 1933. The country was in the height of the Great Depression. In the very first few days of Roosevelt's presidency, they ran the Emergency Banking and Relief Act through Congress and actually amended the war powers that had previously been used for World War I. They extended them to apply to all U.S. citizens. And there was a clause in the War Powers Act, the Trading with the Enemy Act from 1917 that said that all trading with the enemy is suspended, but we're going to excuse U.S. citizens from this. We're not going to apply it to them. And the Banking Act from 1933 just took out the part about not applying to U.S. citizens. So now we're all considered, commercially speaking, enemies, which is why all of our activity in the world has to be licensed, because in a state of war, in order to trade, you have to get a license from the government. And so now hunting, fishing, even marriage, driving on the road, it's all licensed now, and it stems from the war powers. So they have a very high calling to, defend that information, defend the bankruptcy that we went through in those years, defend the war powers that we're still under. Multiple emergencies stacked on top of each other. With the fall of the Soviet Union in the 1990s led to more emergency powers, the Patriot Act in 2001, and it's just multiple emergencies stacked on top of each other. So it's a very closely guarded secret at court and in law and Congress. There's a couple of congressmen that have spoken out about it over the years. James Traficant was one. Charles Lindbergh, back in the day. And not so great things happen to those two. So they definitely defend these secrets very closely. And it's very upsetting to the establishment.
I would say too, that's speaking to the, what's going on in the government and the commerce, but equity jurisprudence came about in England as a alternative to common law, which was a more fair and just way to deal with certain issues, where common law always went to property. They call it in rem, and then equity could speak to the conscience, to the person, and speak to performance and behavior rather than just property or your stuff. So that's how it came about. It was basically out of trust law. And then it went to courts of chancery, and then the courts of chancery were mixed, or combined with courts of commerce. And so equity is in every court in the land, in every Western country. So it's there, and it's in America, it's in the Constitution. So it's always been there, and in the courts, they use equity all the time, because it gives them great power over jurisdiction. Don't they don't have to have jurisdiction over the land or the property. They just have to have the person in the courtroom, and then they have jurisdiction over it. So they use it all the time, and they use it to their benefit, and they use it for their cronies, and they use it in very powerful ways, but they're not used to us knowing how to use it and understanding it. So sometimes when we come in with it, and bringing honor to the court and using equity jurisprudence and compelling performance, they're a little, surprised maybe at first. But we do get treated very well in the courts. So it's not really hidden. It's just that it's not taught either.
Yeah, there's always been this kind of concurrent, good and evil in equity jurisdiction. It came about originally around the 1300s is when it started. And of course, this is following on the heels of the Magna Carta, which was finalized in the 1290s. And there was a real contention between royalty and the people that they ruled over, and just a lot of anger about taxation. There was a huge revolt in England during the 1300s that actually is directly linked to one of the secret societies that wound up stewarding equity jurisprudence for a long time. Freemasonry obviously goes back to at least the 1300s. I mean, they claim it goes back thousands of years, but we have direct evidence of, their participation in the English Revolution of the 1300s. And you see some huge names in Freemasonry being elected to, appointed to Lord Chancellor roles, which is the role over the Chancery courts, the equity courts, like Francis Bacon, under King James I, who was later ousted as chancellor, accused of bribery. But famous historian and inventor within Freemasonry. So it came about because it gave them such a broad discretion. They were able to provide a more moral outcome when it came to, just the lower cases, but it also gave them a huge discretion to, it gives the judge the ability to go outside the confines of the strict law and basically come up with whatever solution that he thinks is most moral, which, can be used for good or evil, of course. And over the centuries, it's been fought over. Equity jurisdiction has been contested over by different factions within the European royalty. And as it passed into American law, again, it was used to give judges a very broad discretion in the way they applied their powers. So they're very used to it. They're certainly used to using it to benefit themselves. They're just not used to seeing it used to dismantle the attacks that they bring against us. And so that's where we come in.
I appreciate that. And you guys shared quite a bit of history, and it's clear that you've become very knowledgeable in the history of it. That might be somewhat intimidating to someone who wants to get started in this. So I guess one good question is, how much of a student of history and how deep does someone really need to go into that in order to be able to practically apply this in their own life?
Well, we've kind of extracted the gems from history so that you don't have to pore over, personal diaries of people in the 1500s and, all sorts of history textbooks and stuff. We go straight to the primary source material. We cover it extensively in the class. Obviously we do use things like Black's Law Dictionary, Burton's Legal Thesaurus, but these are only secondary source materials. You really have to go to the primary source materials to prove things out in a way that the students can actually walk in true confidence in what they're doing. So we've spent a lot of time just researching, fleshing out all the aspects of the process so that we can take the students back to primary source materials to prove out absolutely everything that they're walking in. So you don't have to be a student of history at all. You can be an absolute beginner. Both beginners and people that have been in the Patriot movement for a long time both get a lot out of the class. And you don't have to have any preparation at all, because we're going to walk you through the baby steps first.
I think that both Julian and I are researchers and writers, and so we do bring that into the classes. We have 2 classes that we teach now, and it's allowed us to really take it farther, take it beyond any other equity classes out there just because of that aspect. But also we're always cognizant of, people are coming into this as beginners, and we want everybody to be able to access it and use it and apply it to their lives right away. So it's very applicable, but we're always learning too. So it's a lifelong process, but it's also immediately applicable. So
Yeah, and just to speak to that, I mean, we all stand on the shoulders of giants. Like this process didn't just drop into my lap out of nowhere. Um, there's been some forerunners in this movement that really contributed a lot to where things got to be. To where we're able to just go in and discharge a federal criminal case. And guys like Roger Elvick, and women like Victoria Joy. I mean, just incredible forerunners in this space. That really pioneered the way. And so we all have a duty to, honor those that came before us, but also, carry the ball further down the field for the next generation. And so that, my ceiling can be the floor for my students,
That's a great analogy of carrying the ball further down the field and standing on the shoulders of giants. I like that. One of the things that really resonated with me when I first started learning about equity is I had already previously been a student of natural law, meaning I had already concluded that we live in a reality that runs based on rules, non-man-made rules. So there's just, operating conditions, as it were. And that's why, part of why morality is objective and not just relative, because there are rules, and there are also very simple rules. So when you guys speak about the flexibility of equity, for example, compared with the rigidity of other types of laws, that really resonated with me, because truth is often the most simple, right? Truth is simple. When things start getting complex, that's usually because there could be some kind of deception, or it's just unnecessarily complex. So maybe you could speak to that a little bit about the simple truth, or the simple power of truth that underlies equity.
Yeah, I mean, that's very well put, because the truth is surprisingly simple. There's just this cacophony of noise in the modern day of, all sorts of different, factions and nations competing for, what they want you to think the truth is. But God's truth is very simple. The still small voice of the Holy Spirit will allow the real truth to resonate in your ear. The more you train yourself to discern these things, the easier it is for you to hear it. And to train yourself, I mean, you really just have to take whatever it is you believe and match it up against the very most intelligent and best argued version of whatever the other side is saying. And so you just smash your beliefs up against, whoever just is the total opposite of what you believe. And, whatever is still left standing is true.
yeah, I think that's right. And we get a lot of people come to us, and in all walks of life and in all stages of things happening in their lives, and that we hear so often, God sent me to you, and which is wonderful, but it's also a huge responsibility. And also that just that idea that I'm not doing this to fight and argue and cause more conflict and seek revenge and that kind of thing, that there's another way. And that just, I think, is a truth that we can all see and feel and know, and it's in our hearts that we don't want to have to do it that way. We don't want to have to fight and argue and like memorize a bunch of stuff. You just want it to be in your heart, that you can just speak it. There is a lot to learn, but in a very fundamental way, it's just learning to internalize this in a way that you can just speak it wherever you are and whatever happens. And I think that's the kind of truth that speaks to everybody.
Yeah, I think all people carry a fundamental truth within themselves of a light that God has sparked in their spirit of who they are meant to be and what their destiny and their calling is. In a world that is increasingly filled with so much darkness, our spirits are really lamps in the darkness to light the way for others. And nobody would be walking around today if there wasn't still a thread that they could follow to weave their way back to God's truth through the trauma they've experienced, through the fear and the scarcity mentality, all the separation that they've experienced in their lives. There's got to be still a kindling of truth within them, or else they wouldn't even be alive. I truly believe that. And so we are very much in the business of helping people set their feet upon that path and come back into alignment with who God really made them to be.
I think that too, that there's one thing, like, no matter what culture you're in, what part of the world you're in, what religion you are, it doesn't matter. Every single human being feels fear. We all have fear about something. And that fear unites us. And what we've discovered is a way to walk through that fear. There's a remedy for it, and there's a way to stand, and there's a way to understand your identity, and that, God's standing there with you. And so we kind of combine all of that to give people the confidence, the comfort, the peace, the knowing to deal with whatever issue they're facing.
Yeah. There's a lot of people that just come to us proactively, just wanting to have a remedy if something ever arises, and that's great. And there's a lot of people that come to us when they are in the midst of the refiner's fire, and they're burning away. They have no idea what to do. And, even in those situations, we can help pull somebody out of the fire and, not lose who they were meant to be in the midst of all this attack and fear and stress. We can turn the whole situation around and transmute it all to something that's going to set that person on just a rocket to their destiny.
I can actually speaking of the timing of when you find something, I can actually speak to that. Of course, you guys know this will be more for the benefit of our audience, but as you guys remember, so we've been working together, we've been collaborating in some way for almost a year and a half now, if you can believe that. And many people who followed my work, followed the Freedom Studio, will know that I've always been passionate about this, but in the beginning I was kind of all in on something called conditional acceptance. In fact, that's what we called our organization in the beginning. And I was very passionate about it, but somewhere in my heart and my mind, I knew that I was still missing something. Like, we weren't really moving the ball down the field, so to speak, just to use that analogy. And interestingly enough, and I've often said, when the student is ready, the teaching will appear. Like, I found that to be true in my own life. And it was interesting because someone who was involved in my community was very insistent, and she sent me some messages. I think it may have been on Telegram or email. And she said, "David, I need to talk to you." And I said, "Okay, well, let's do it." And I eventually got to speak with her, and she had my ear, and she said, "David, I just enrolled in this course, or I've previously enrolled in this course. You got to take this course. You got to take this course. This is going to be a game changer for you and what you're trying to do." And me being, reasonably open-minded and not thinking, "Oh, I have all the answers, like I've got it all figured out." I was like, "Okay, tell me more about it." Of course, as people can figure out, they were referring to the course that you guys run called Honor with Equity. I pretty much immediately enrolled. I thought it was, a sound investment for us as an organization for me to take that course. And, well, let's just say I never looked back from there. So I really appreciate that.
Wonderful. Yeah, it's been fantastic working with you. And yeah, the conditional acceptance thing, I mean, there's all sorts of commercial provisions for that, but it locks you into this, back and forth argument with the people that you're, conditionally accepting from. The acceptance process that we use is, you can find conditional acceptance in UCC Article 2. Our class more gets into UCC Articles 3 and 9, where you just accept on, whatever it is. And you actually have the inherent ability to, it doesn't matter how much they're saying you owe, you can transmute that into an obligation on their part to settle and close the accounting in the matter. And that goes, deep into commercial law. It's reflected in the Bills of Exchange Acts, which the UCC is based off of. So it really works anywhere in the Western world. It's not just an American remedy. We have students in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, England, all over the world, and they're all seeing remedy in amazing ways. With anything from traffic all the way up to property taxes and mortgage and even criminal cases. So it's definitely based upon the international commerce that the entire world participates in, and we're just really exploiting certain inherent truths of commerce that allow us to be able to stand in this. And then of course equity comes in to smooth out the edges, make sure that we don't fall into contracts by creating controversy and arguing. And I can break that down more in a minute if you like. But you have something to...
Well, I would say too, just David's testimony there, that we're on, I think, the 7th series of teaching this class, and it's been mostly word of mouth, and we don't do a lot of advertising or marketing. David, of course, a lot of people come through David, but I think that speaks a lot to the class and what's going on, is that people are going through this and they're having successes, they're getting remedy, and they're wanting to share that idea. So a lot of it is word of mouth, and that it's also it's really life-changing, as David said, that he was doing one path, and you spoke to repentance earlier. It makes you change the way you think. And we've spent this time here together in Nashville, and we're kind of always using like equity phrases, and we're just gonna accept and return that, and whatever. So we have a different way of looking at the world and thinking about the world, and it's kind of fun in a way too. So I think that's a good testimony that David gave it there about how it kind of changes thinking, changes life, and never look back. And another thing too is that once you take a class with us, we open every class after that to students. So we have a lot of alumni that sit in on the classes, and every time through you learn something new. We're always researching and bringing new things to the class. We're updating the class. We now do a pre-recorded part and a live part and a really big question and answer part. So there's a lot going on in the classes too.
Yeah, there's such a wonderful community that's formed around this. I mean, I hear every single week, this changed my life. I'm having my kids sit on the classes. We practice the court script at the dinner table.
Their kids and their chickens.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of our students are into farming, and you'll see the chickens in the background and stuff. Yeah, and self-sustainability. I mean, there's the community is incredible. We have several hundred people, in the classes now, and like Maggie said, there, once you're in for life. Once you go through a class, you can attend all future equity classes, and it really helps to promote the community vibe. We have a group where they all, discuss the process with each other and help each other out. And of course, me and Maggie, answer questions in there, and they're all seeing remedy, and every single one of them that uses the tools and sticks with them is seeing remedy in their lives, and just totally having their lives transformed. And I mean, some of them came out of some really bad situations and were able to turn it all around. So it's just so wonderful to see that.
It is
Amazing. Yep. And I definitely want us to dive in a little bit about the courts in a minute, but before or in testimonials, but actually let's focus on the court for a second, because that's come up a few times, and that might be surprising to people who are new to all of this. And certainly, I think we can probably agree that most people find just the notion of going to court very intimidating. Just the notion of having to go there, for most people. Maybe you could speak a little bit to when you talk about bringing equity to the court or appearing in court. Talk a little more about that to paint the picture of what students are actually going to learn with respect to the courts.
For sure. I mean, basically we turn mice into lions as far as that goes. The court is a very intimidating place. Obviously the judge is raised all the way up there, and he's sitting there in his black robe, and he's banging his gavel at you, and They got like fancy wood all over the place, and their symbols adorn the walls, and the bailiffs are standing there with their guns on their hips and stuff. It's a very intimidating place, but ultimately, they really don't even hide this fact. I mean, it's right there in Black's Law Dictionary, and in many judicial opinions, that the court is a bank. You can look up the word bank in Black's and find that out, and then trace to the primary source materials through that. But you're just going to the bank. The judge is just a banker at the end of the day, and he has a job to protect the emergency, but he also has a duty to settle and close the matter when you come in commercial honor. And you show honor to the judge, you show honor to the court. As the Bible says, you honor the king. And you're just really there to help them, to assist them with the settlement and closure of their accounts. And we have taken people that are very scared of public speaking, and have serious cases that they're dealing with, and we've raised them up to a position where they really stand in confidence. I mean, that's the power of taking people through the primary source material, and then improvisational court script practice that we do. We take somebody through a whole experience where I'll be the mean judge, and I'll kind of be berating them,
or I will,
but then we'll give them feedback, and they'll be able to use that to basically just undergo a metamorphosis into somebody who is confident and capable in public speaking, who's able to keep the conversation on track for their goals, who has such a commanding knowledge of all the gems that we've brought forth in the class. And we'll work through that with every single student. We have entire class sessions dedicated just to role playing in court, and making sure that the students are really truly prepared to speak to anybody, not just a judge, but somebody knocking on their door saying, "Oh, we're going to fine you if you don't trim back your tree branches," or your culvert wasn't installed properly, you got to redo it, or you need a license for this, or whatever. So whether I'm standing on the side of the road with the revenue officer, or I'm in the highest halls of power, I know that I can confidently stand in this. And that's where we get all our students to as well.
I think too, we, in the classes, one of the things we do is kind of take the mystery, mystique, and sow the intimidation out of the courts and the judges. And, we do that by, one, understanding what equity is, understanding who we are in that situation. We are moral, sentient beings. We are children of God. And that equity, one of the things it says is equity makes us equal with the judge. They're not over us. And, we're just, we just learn how to speak in a way that oftentimes we see the judges giving our students more honor than if they're bringing some patriot method or even a commercial method. So, we look at what's really going on behind the scenes, and when you understand that better, it helps a lot. It helps to have confidence. And also, we're not going in there to prove something or fight. We do it with what we call the art of inquiry. We learn the questions to ask, and those questions, we say that they prick the conscience of the judge. They make him think, and that's what equity is all about. If you look up equity, it's about conscience and fairness and justice. And so we're coming in there to remind them that is their duty, a sworn oath and duty to bring that to the court and to bring that remedy. So we do that with our questions to remind them that that's what they're there for. And we do it through the equity maxims. And so we're not fighting, arguing. We're just simply asking questions. And, when they're threatening you with something, we very much have the due process right to be heard. And we just do that in the form of a question, just, simple question.
Yeah, very much speaks to, equity being about, a higher standard of morality. If you look it up in Black's, it says equity strives at a higher justice that is just not available in the strict common law or commercial law. And this gives the judges a very broad discretion to do what is moral and conscionable. There's maxims that state that, where the law feigns, equity subsists, where equity follows the law, because if the law messes everything up, then equity comes in to clean up the mess. And in the modern day, when we're all under central banking policy, modern monetary theory, and the courts are actually have a financial interest in every case that comes before them, which can be just researched easily with the court registry investment system and the bonds that are being traded on these cases. The law has certainly feigned, and so equity must come in to clean up the mess and provide a more moral outcome for anybody ensnared in this system. And it does prick the conscience of the judge. It also implies kind of a forward-looking tort liability for the judge. Not exactly something that we would ever even need to act upon, because the law speaks for itself. Equity, the judge is the law speaking, and equity makes you equal with the judge. So you're really just coming in as his partner in settling the matter. And we see it again and again, with everything from simple cases all the way up to federal district court.
As you were sharing that, I remembered asking is as king.
Right.
Yeah. And it's interesting how words often hint to the deeper meanings behind it. So that's definitely not a coincidence.
Right. Yeah. He who is asking the questions is certainly in control of the conversation. It also goes back to not contracting with them. The court is actually the one venue in all the world that was established to eliminate controversy when people can't agree on something. They take it to the court and thereby give full jurisdiction over to the court to make whatever decision really they want. I mean, again, equity allows them to take a very broad discretion. So it's very important to stay in that position of inquiry and not in the adversarial position that our courts have kind of moved into. Equity started as an inquisitorial process. The court actually used to get very much involved in getting to the bottom of the truth and asking everybody to come in and answer some questions and figuring out what the truth really was.
The original discovery.
Yeah, that was the original discovery process. Was the court would actually interview people and discuss, and it wasn't this adversarial thing that it's become in recent centuries, where each side is actually trying to block the truth from the other side even being able to come out and be argued in court. The entire discovery process now is adversarial, where you're doing everything you can to suppress the information of the other side. So equity just kind of skips all of that and brings that inquisitorial nature back to the court and really turns the court of Babylon into a court of conscience.
Amazing. And some of the maxims of equity obviously speak to that. So equity acts on the conscience. A court of equity is a court of conscience. So those maxims, which is a great starting point, in my opinion, for anybody to immediately start studying equity. I mean, of course, you're not going to learn all the details that you would learn when you go through an advanced course, but at least you start to get some initial exposure. And there's a lot of great truths that are embedded within those maxims.
Oh, for sure.
Yes.
Yeah. Equity, more than any other jurisdiction, is very guided by its maxims. The maxims are a lot more fluid in contract law and common law, but the equity maxims are very much in line with Scripture and are certainly a guiding light for many people that are dealing with the courts.
Yeah.
Amazing. Now, just before we hear some testimonials or case studies or some success stories that you guys might want to share, just to draw one important distinction, since we have been talking about the court, I do a lot of research like you guys, and of course, if you spend time on YouTube, you run into all these so-called sovereign citizen in court videos, and I don't know to what extent they're real or not, but I just thought it would be worth pointing out for people who are watching that what we're teaching here or what's being taught has no resemblance whatsoever to pretty much almost everything that is labeled so-called sovereign citizen in court. So that might be an important distinction to draw out. What do you think?
Sure. I mean, yeah. I mean, there's when you just go in and just you're fighting and you're arguing, you're trying to claim certain rights from the Constitution or from various judicial decisions over the years, you are creating controversy in, like I said, the one venue in all the world that was created to eliminate controversy. When you go into a court and you start arguing with people and you cite laws and you say, well, no, judge, that's not the way it should be. You didn't have the proper authority to do that because of this thing that happened in the 1800s. All you're doing is just putting the jurisdiction into their hands and allowing them to make whatever ruling they see fit, because you've gone into one place in all the world that was created to eliminate controversy, and you went and made a bunch of controversy. It's not a very good idea. Instead, if you look up the definition of discharge in Blacks under the subheader equity practice, equity makes you the accounting defendant. So you skip all the arguing and the fighting, and you can just handle it as a commercial matter, because everything in the modern day is commercial. Under modern monetary theory, every public entity, like a court or a government agency, has to participate in this central banking policy of generating bonds and participating in the securities market, and adherence to the various securities laws. And through all of that, we can basically just bring about a process which discharges all the charges that they bring against us. So it's very polite, it's very reasonable, very honorable. I mean, you're not yelling and fighting with anybody. You don't need to cite laws at all. You don't have to argue at all or stand on constitutional rights. All the power comes from commercial law. Negotiable instruments now pass freely on their face as a substitute for money. This framework was established with the Bills of Exchange Acts in most of the world, but in the United States, it didn't happen until 1933. And that gives us the power to simply use our signatures, which is what makes those instruments negotiable, to discharge any matter that's brought against us. We are, a lot of sovereign citizens, they try to claim we're the creditors, but then they also say they're the beneficiary, which is kind of contradictory. In a sense, we are creditors. I mean, we're the source of original issue for all commerce. It's just that we gave away the ability to create money to the banks in 1913, or rather Congress gave it away on our behalf. Even that being the case, when they send us things, they are basically equivalent to certain types of financial instruments, like even a summons from a court, for example. It bears all the fundamental legal qualities of a draft instrument. So if it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, you can treat it like a duck. And because of the negotiable instruments laws, we are able to take those things that they send us, which seem very scary on their face. Instead of arguing about them, we just perform an accounting procedure upon them. And this actually gives the courts, or the IRS or whoever it is that people are dealing with, the ability to take that to the central bank and get paid with it, or just perform a local adjustment and set off procedure on their own books, and get settled up by the Federal Reserve on the back end of that. And it's really profoundly simple compared to having to memorize all sorts of codes and statutes and procedures and precedents and regulations. We don't really have to do any of that. Now, there's a lot of processes out there where people use negotiable instruments. So, some people in your audience might be asking, well, what makes us any different? The issue with just giving a negotiable instrument to the court is that you have already contracted with them in a number of other ways, usually. I mean, just by going in and fighting and arguing, as I discussed, you're creating controversy. You're giving the judge the ability to make a ruling on the controversy, which he's just going to, do whatever is going to best serve the system. The difference is that we teach people how to not fall into these many, many adhesion contracts at court or with the IRS or the CRA or whoever it is that they're dealing with. We just leave that one avenue of that negotiable instrument that we finalize and tender to them in good faith, to use that to settle and close the matter. So the difference is that, most people are doing that, some kind of negotiable instrument, but they also leave all these other avenues available for, settling the case. And of course, they're going to choose those. So we just leave that one avenue available to them, and equity helps us to stay completely out of the adhesion contracts that would pull us out of that. And so it looks very different when we go to court. We're not yelling at the judge or citing laws or anything. We're just acting in full commercial honor, and we actually tend to get treated very well by judges. They'll even kind of give us a wry smile sometimes at the end of a case, or just a wink and a nod. It's rare, but it does happen.
Just speaking to the sovereign citizen thing, now that's kind of a buzzword in, the judicial and, police. And so, you get labeled sovereign citizen. They've been given the APB on that it means that that person is anti-government or even violent. So if like a cop or a judge can peg the person as sovereign citizen, then they can call out the dogs and make it even worse for the person. So we stay away from even the appearance or the terminology or any of the thing that is associated that's on their little checklist of sovereign citizen. So we stay away from that buzzword and the terminology that people associated with that movement use. So we're doing it different in that way. And even though just because we're doing something different, sometimes they still might say sovereign citizen, but we have ways to answer that as well. And we answer that with questions that make them think again. And it's really, we really try to not, emphasize the idea of us and them. Really, when you prick the conscience, you're really wanting the other person, whether it's a judge or the police officer beside the road, to prick their humanity as well. To have them see that they also are children of God and that we're in this world full of crazy rules. So, we have ways to do that with our questions. Another thing is that we, because of this ministry that we're in, we see so many processes come across our desk of things that people have tried out there. And so we know pretty well what doesn't work or what doesn't work that well. And we steer people away from that as much as possible. Because, we have a responsibility. We don't want any of our students to get in any kind of trouble. So, we want to get them out of trouble. We want to give them the remedy. And so that's what we're focused on.
Yeah. With police officers, we teach students to humanize the situation, to de-escalate the situation. With judges, we teach students to keep the conversation on track for, the accounting procedure, to honor the judge, to answer his questions, but, in the form of a question, and to keep the conversation back on track for their goals. With prosecutors, we teach the students to minimize their exposure, get the conversation done with as quickly as possible in a way that doesn't expose you. With the IRS, we teach students to be very honorable and to just help the IRS with their accounts. So there's a number of different situations that our students might find themselves in, and they are well prepared for each of them.
This might be a good moment to share maybe a case study or a success story or two, just to kind of illustrate that. What do you guys think?
Sure. Yeah. We could talk about, there was one case in New York where a student had just continual traffic issues, kind of against our advice. He refused to get the license, the registration, the insurance, and that's, some people just are very principled in that way. I recommend to do those things simply because you're going to have a lot less hassle in the world, and it really doesn't lose you anything. Doesn't mean you don't have a remedy for whatever somebody's coming against you with. But he wanted to stand on that, which meant that, he was going to have to stand on it every single time he got pulled over. If he was in a state with the license plate scanners, he'd probably be getting pulled over a lot. So we had to do some kind of quick work with him and get him ready. And he had about 20 total traffic citations. So he was looking at some pretty serious jail time, at least 6 months. It's just a long time to be away from your kids. He had the toughest judge in his county, and the guy was very sharp. This judge, I mean, super witty, very aggressive, a little prideful, But we helped the student to show honor to the judge, and there were some mistakes. I mean, he had to learn very quickly in a short amount of time. With the toughest judge in his county, but he was able to come back and show the judge honor in a way that commercially speaking, but also morally speaking with equity, and he actually got the entire case discharged before trial. Didn't even have to go through trial. And then he had like 11 more traffic citations on top of that, like for some different case. They just dropped all of that. The judge actually looked at him like he was proud of him and smiled at him and said, in the interest of justice, we're going to dismiss this case. So it was a very powerful story of somebody he was also operating in a lot of the pre-1933 equity stuff. And we helped him turn all of that around and stand confidently in court.
I think, too, we have numerous, people dealing with the tax agency and the IRS. And, I think, I used to say that was like for me, that was like something I woke up every morning, which is kind of a worry about it. And I think that's true for a lot of people. And a lot of people have, they're just leave it sitting there, or they're not doing anything about it, or they've tried some process that it's not working, and we just have so many successes with students able to deal with that issue. And it's not fighting, it's not arguing, it's giving them what they need, what they want, giving the tax agency what they want, and settling that. And then they get a letter that says no further action is required on your account. And man, when somebody gets that kind of letter, they're in equity for life. It's just an amazing feeling, and it changes people's lives to go, wow, all this stuff I was doing, and in a way, like a lot of these teachings out there are correct. The things that are going on are, we like to say that it's not necessarily that it's corrupt, but the deck is stacked against the average person. And so, we kind of even that out and give people a way. And I think to me, that's the most amazing testimony, is people that went from, I was afraid every day, I was freaked out every day, I was worried every day, to I'm free of it. I know what to do. Maybe they're still bringing equity to issues in their life, but they're not freaked out about it. It's like, oh, this came in the mail, now I know what to do with it, and it's not a big problem. So to me, those are the, just that life-changing shift that people get. It's just, wow, that's, it's just amazing. And we celebrate with them, man, it's just such a good feeling when people get to that place.
Yeah, that's always the best.
Yes.
This notion of having a sense of humor, of things being a little more fun, especially for serious matters, this is really important in my opinion. I think humor often leads to the truth. In fact, humor almost always leads to the truth. And I would say, what's the point of doing things in life if you're not going to at least find some joy in them? So, but maybe on a more serious note, will this work for criminal charges? Maybe you could speak to that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We've discharged criminal cases. There's equity students that have discharged at the federal level, being threatened with decades in prison, all over the country. And we've taken on cases like that all over the world, with criminal repercussions. So absolutely, it's been used that way many times.
We don't see those cases as often, fortunately. I mean, it's more often we're dealing with the discharge of debts and civil. But we found too that, that um, there's very much a spiritual aspect to equity, and it's equity comes from the Bible, and so we've also given students a kind of a different way of looking at the Bible. Culture teaches us that, you know, certain this way or that way about it, but when you're looking at it as a kind of a resource book, a textbook, a book that's teaching you technologies that are going to make your life better and help you to get through life. You read it a different way. It's not about like, you've been bad, I'm going to hit you over the head with this Bible. It's more like, oh wow, this is something that's gonna change the way I approach life, and make it better. And so I think that's a big part of what we do too, is give people um, that rock to stand on. That's the name of our ministry, is Standing on the Rock. And if a person is going through something as serious as criminal, in our private coaching, we deal a lot with the identity of that person. And you know are you having, God wants to talk to us, God wants to communicate with us, and he's there to help us. You don't have to be any particular religion for that to be true. It's just, opening yourself to hearing that voice. He's always talking, and we just want people to hear it, because anything can happen when you walk in that courtroom, and we prepare you with the questions and what's going on. But also, you need to be hearing from the God who made everything, and he's going to help you. He's going to be a part of that. So it's kind of part of our training, especially in like a criminal course, but really anybody going to court, they need to understand the rock that they stand on and the help that they have. And that God wants to help you be successful. He doesn't want you to go to prison. It even says that in Matthew, how to agree with thine adversary quickly so that you don't go to prison. And so, it's right there. And we really help people to find that identity, find a way to walk through that fear so they don't feel the fear, and to, have the tools to be able to stand there. And it also says in the Bible that, when you're standing in front of your accusers, the Holy Spirit is there to give you the words. So, it's very powerful when you realize, Jesus came to speak to the underdog, to the people that were oppressed, the people that were, the Pharisees and the lawyers of the time, were giving everybody a hard time and telling them what to do and putting them in debt. And, so he was teaching you how to come out of that. And, it's really a beautiful thing when you can kind of see it from that perspective. It's such a shift and a power and authority that you have. And then, then it's like, let me at them. Let me get to court. I'm going to do this, and that's the way I felt when I went in there. And, they were when I went, the judge was, first Julian was going to try to speak for, they threw him out of the courtroom. And then she can speak for herself. And then he said, cover up her microphone, so I was like speaking around the microphone, and, I have a due process right to be heard. So, when you know what you're doing and where you stand and who's standing with you, then man, wow, it's a whole different ball game.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, of course, most people that come to us, they want to discharge debts, credit cards, IRS debts, CRA debts, ATO, property taxes, things like this. And we've discharged millions of dollars worth of these. When it comes to criminal matters, I mean, I did tell the story of the guy in New York. I mean, we've handled a couple of, criminal traffic matters where they could be facing up to a couple years in jail. And gotten those discharged for people. But there's other cases where, somebody might have been doing like, a administrative process where they actually put liens on people, put liens on the cops, put liens on the judges. And this does not go well for people. I mean, if you're listening to this, you get one thing out of this interview: don't put liens on judges. We've had people come to us in these situations being threatened with decades in jail for doing things like that. And there's a woman in Tennessee just last year who's being threatened with a total of 42 years in state prison for putting liens on judges. Before she found equity, she was, she was pulled over and she was using the private tags on her car. She had her like 93-year-old dad in the car with her, and the cops just like pulled her out of the car and took her away and just left the dad. Like, thankfully her brother was in the neighborhood. He was able to come get the dad. And then she's very upset. She put liens on everybody. And they threatened her with, retaliatory acts, which was like 7 counts of, 6 years each, a total of 42 years they were threatening her with. And she's just this sweet woman, she's an artist, very, very personable, very charming. And, she came to us for help before she went to trial. She had already begun bringing equity to the case, and she needs some help with some of the higher level aspects. We got her ready for, how to head into sentencing. And basically almost the entire case was discharged. They gave her, instead of putting her in jail, which they were trying to do, they gave her 1 year of probation.
She's facing like 40 years.
Yeah. And I mean, they were going to lock her up for quite a long time, but instead the final ruling was a year of probation. And even that she's bringing equity to. She isn't necessarily bound to the terms of the probation agreement. We have ways of dealing with all of the contracts that were offered by the court. So she's continuing to bring equity to that and actually is able to operate in full freedom, even in that situation. So yeah, I mean, most of the stuff that people come to us with are not going to require that level of intensity, where you're taken all the way through trial and all the way up to sentencing. A lot of debts that people come and want discharge, and that is enough to transform lives. But when somebody comes to us facing a criminal matter, we're a lot more careful to make sure that they are really committed to that metamorphosis, to really come out of the arguing and the fighting and the running, the scarcity, the fear, the separation, and really embracing a walk with God. Not doing things that's going to cloud their minds, being willing to give up on all the fighting and the arguing and they don't have to be, you don't have to be a Christian for this. I mean, if you just have to have a close relationship with God, you have to go to him and figure out what your identity is, because he gave us all unique gifts. He gave us all a unique purpose. And, we really work with that person closely because they can be taken all the way up to sentencing. They can be taken right up to the Red Sea. And just like Moses, they're going to have to dip their toe in the water before they see the waves part. But we do see miracles like that in criminal cases. It's happened many times. And but the student has to be sometimes willing to go all the way. Now, if that sounds intense, I mean, what's the alternative? Taking a plea deal and going to prison. So yeah, I mean, it's intense. It's a lot. It's a lot of transformation that needs to take place. But we work with them very closely to get them through that. And there's no better way. There's no better remedy out there.
I think we are working with some people that, because I think probably most people do know that in these cases, like 98% are offered a plea deal. And if people, being offered a plea deal means you're pleading guilty to something. And there are plenty of people out there who don't want to do that on principle. They're not guilty. And so, and then the only, that we know of is just to hire an attorney. And some people have already done that. They've just thrown like all kinds of money at attorneys and don't want to do that. And the attorney's not doing anything for them, or just wants them to take a plea deal, or, and we know people that, that we're working with now that, have cases where, it was, they were kind of targeted and they didn't do anything wrong and they don't want to take a plea deal. And so we'll be using equity with them to be able to, have them be able to stand on the rock and ask the right questions and, discharge it rather than take some plea deal when they don't deserve it.
Right. Yeah. Federal prosecutors have a 98% win rate, and most of those are just plead out. And, when somebody comes to us with that kind of issue, I mean, do any of us really believe that 98% of people that are federally prosecuted are actually guilty of what they're being accused of? I mean, most of us get some kind of experience with court where, we realize that there's a lot of just kind of moving people along and adhering people with contracts that goes on. I mean, even people that aren't in this movement at all have had experiences like that and understand that to be true. So it's not satisfactory to take a plea deal. I mean, if you are innocent of what you're being accused of, then there is a better way. And what we do really doesn't even figure into the prosecutor's win rate. I mean, the case just gets dismissed or discharged. Our discharge can either be generic, it can be special. We'll take it either way. And the prosecutor gets to keep their win rate. We don't really care about that. We just want to be left alone.
Yeah, and I think too that it's really important that people not stay silent when they're being accused of something or somebody's saying something about it. And there's a lot of that in society. Just comply, just go along. Like when there was the whole fake virus thing. Just wear the mask, just take the vaccine, just and you're just like, oh, okay. So we teach people, that they're. People think, well, you either have to fight it and, make this big war, or I have to comply and do what they say. So we kind of give people another option that they can, they can just begin to question things and put some questions out there and not stay silent. And it's very important that we not, live not by lies, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. There's, like you said, it's either argue or comply, fight or knuckle under. And there is a third way. There is a way of, instead of contending with somebody, which creates more separation between you and them and causes them to lock into their opinion, there's a way of kind of going meta with it, we like to say, and just kind of asking the questions that prick their conscience and bring to heart really the deeper issues at hand in a situation. When you can do that with somebody, you can transform the situation of being a fight where somebody loses into being a situation where both parties actually come away for the better. And so that's what the art of inquiry is all about.
Amazing. Wow, that's all very compelling and very encouraging. So let's do this. We're going to take a quick break here, and then I think this is going to be a great point to when we get back to talk more about the specifics of what it looks like to take the classes, both classes. So how's that sound to you guys?
Amen.
Sounds good.
Yes.
All right. All right, we're back from a break here, and it's going to be great in a minute to talk a little bit about the classes and get into that. But before we did, Margaret kindly reminded me of a great question that I wanted to make sure to ask here, which is basically, I'd love to hear your perspective on, so this seems to be pretty well hidden. Are we going to reach a point where knowledge of this kind, knowledge of how to bring equity, is going to become widely known? What's your perspective on that?
Well, I think in one way we can look to the history because, first there was common law, and that's really all that people knew. And, at that time there was people that went, hey, this isn't covering everything. This isn't fair. It doesn't speak to, this certain situation. It only talks about property, and it doesn't help the beneficiary, the beneficial equitable owner of something, in trust law. So they had to come up with something else, and that's when they came up with equity, and they came up with chancery courts. And you have to imagine that back then there were people that were on the cutting edge. There were people saying, hey, we need to do this, and other people were going, oh no, never heard of it, we're not doing that. So but it happened. So if there's enough people, like a tipping point where people start to really understand what's going on and they start using it, then things shift. And then there was another time in history where there was chancery courts and there was the commercial maritime courts, and they combined into one thing so that you could find equity in every court. You didn't have to go to a special court to get equity. And so people then were saying, oh no, you can't do that, it has to be, but there were people on the cutting edge who said, like, this is the way we're using it. So and so what we're doing now, we're on the cutting edge, and people are boldly going there. We're doing it lawfully. We're doing it in honor. We're doing it according to God's word. So, but it's still cutting edge, and I believe it's going to shift, and that's part of this interview, part of us coming together. And just making it more widespread is we're not hiding. We're saying, this is a way to be in the world, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah, and the more people that get a hold of this, I mean, right now we're seeing the national debt, for example, just at insane levels. Obviously, I mean, can never be paid off the way that we're being offered. That's because the more loans people take out, and even paying them back with banknotes. I mean, if you look up the definition of note, it's just evidence of a debt. You can't pay a debt with another debt. This is why the national debt is just continually increasing. Equity and the acceptance and discharge process that we use actually is the only thing that goes in and balances out both sides of the ledger and actually decreases the national debt. And if you want to be a part of a movement that's going to make the future a beautiful place to live in for our children, then learning acceptance, learning discharge, learning how to handle these matters commercially in full honor is really going to put this country back on the right track, put the whole Western world back on the right track. And I believe that equity is going to continue to spread. And there will be a tipping point. Right now we're just helping individual families turn their lives around. But when enough people do this, it's going to reach a tipping point where the benefits are going to spread to everybody.
Amazing. Yeah. Amazing.
I think too, like, you see those, I don't know if you've seen those things where, they do these studies where, people are in a room and, or they'll have people come in and as plants and they'll all be compliant and like, well, they're all standing up, so I'm going to stand up, or they're all sitting down, I'm going to sit down. And so people, we're social animals, but equity gives you a way to go, excuse me, why is this, happening, and to ask a question about it instead of to just comply and or to go along or to argue. And it's just such a beautiful way to say, to question and not do it in a combative way. And I think that's the future. Yeah.
And of course, your class, I can speak from firsthand experience because I've been enrolled in your classes, like I said, since September of 24, so almost a year and a half now. And the class attendance the enrollment is increasing. I've noticed that. So let's talk a little bit about the classes. you obviously offer 2 classes. So one of them is Honor with Equity, which speaks a lot to what we've been discussing so far. But you also have a second class called the Equity Trust System. So it might be helpful. Maybe we can start there if you can just kind of fill in the gaps about the relationship between those 2 classes and how they perhaps are complementary.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the Honor with Equity class teaches you absolutely everything that you need to discharge any attack that somebody could possibly bring against you. It teaches you how to initiate a process which will eventually lead to complete discharge and just being left alone by whatever agency or court is coming after the person. During the midst of that process, they have certain tools that they can bring to bear against you, liens, levies, garnishments, things like this. So that's where the equity trust system comes in. So while we're going about the process of compelling discharge, they're trying to use their tools against us as well. And the equity trust system teaches people how to reform their businesses to where you can operate in the commercial realm, but have it completely detached from your name, be able to fully operate in the private, extract the profits down into the private and keep them safe. In a world, full of increasing commercial public exposure, with a national grid of surveillance cameras and license plate scanners going up as we speak, increasingly walled in interactions online, crypto regulations coming down, gold and silver prices going through the roof. We need a way to minimize our public exposure, not because we're trying to, hide things, but just because, government overreach is obviously, we saw in recent years, a very real thing, so the more that we can minimize, how much we're putting ourselves out there, and not just for the government, but for all the scammers out there too, the better. And so the equity trust system helps us to basically learn the absolute best practices over the last 700 years of case precedents for trust law. Again, we go deep into history and just extract all the gems and give them to the students so they don't have to comb through all these textbooks, and equip them with 700 years worth of powers based on judicial precedents that give them the ability to be very fluid in the way they operate in the commercial world, yet be fully protected and build generational wealth for their families in the private, operate in a business publicly and have a private wealth generation system. And we've actually fully adapted that material to Canada, to Australia, to the UK. So our trust systems work anywhere in the Western world, anywhere that's based on English jurisprudence, just like the equity classes. So that's the relationship between the two. And together, they make you completely untouchable as a defendant.
I think too, like in some ways, the equity class is the foundational material. I mean, we take you through definitions and maxims and that sort of thing. But in a way, it would be really nice if before you bring equity, you had the trust class to have the asset protection in place. But just the way it is, you have to teach the foundation and then that. So, but they really, really work together, and you really kind of need one to do the other. And so, but we actually have a requirement to take the equity class first. So it is either pre or co-requisite in order to take the trust class, because it's kind of advanced material. It's like an advanced equity class. The students that are in there, it's just a whole nother level. It's, a lot of people that are running small businesses, entrepreneurs, that kind of thing. And it's just been an amazing journey, really learning what we like to say is best practices in worst case scenarios. So we want you to be protected, like if the worst agency out there is coming at you, we want you to be protected. And it can be, you have to really know what's going on. And there's so many trusts offered out there. And it's just like, what do you do, but we've just really cut through all of that and found out, the essence of what really needs to take place. And it's, it's kind of a layering process and using roles in a certain way. And to really protect these small businesses, these families. It helps families come together, and then we're also, you have your, offerings in that as well, that we've been working together on that for trustees. And it's just been an amazing kind of fellowship process, a family process. And, the wealthy, they know how to do trust from the beginning. As a kid, hey, I'm going to be a part of this trust, so I'm going to learn how to use it. Whereas most people are like, oh, okay, I'm going to get this trust, and it just sits on a shelf collecting dust because they don't know how to use it. And so that's what we don't want. We want you to be able to understand it, to even write it yourself if you want to. We can help you in that, but to be able to operate in it in a day-to-day way.
Absolutely. Yeah, and there's a lot of equity students that have just taken just the base level equity class and used that to discharge their debts and never gave a single thought to asset protection. So it's possible to just use the equity materials. Actually, it's very possible. But for any debts over $100,000, or if you have a business that has a lot of commercial exposure, if you're in more heavily regulated industries that require insurance and bonds, and possibly you have government contracts, or you're getting reimbursed by the Veterans Administration, whatever the case may be, if you have the more commercial exposure you have in the larger debts, you really need asset protection. And then also in places like California, the Franchise Tax Board of California, their kind of state level tax board, they're actually even more aggressive than the IRS. I mean, even if the debt's only like $500 in California, you're still going to need the asset protection. Usually I say, like, if you just have a business or, very large debts, definitely take the trust class. But even if you owe $1 in California, you better take the trust class, because they're going to come get that dollar from you.
I can speak to that from personal experience, because when I was living in California about 20 years ago, they actually snatched $500 out of my bank account.
Yeah.
So, and this was 20 years ago.
Very
so
petty.
I can firsthand experience there. As far as trusteeship, I'm very enthusiastic about that. I just became a trustee for one family trust, and then it looks like in collaboration with you guys, I'm going to become trustee for at least 2 other family or business related trusts.
That's awesome.
I'm very enthusiastic about this. This is great. Of course, as you mentioned, Margaret, we have the trustee network, which is one of our memberships, where we are basically helping people to become trustees or to find trustees, and working closely with the classes that you teach. I call them now equity-minded trustees. So it's a trustee who also knows equity vis-a-vis studying this material, so it makes them even more, someone who is even more formidable, shall we say, in terms of being able to help protect and defend the assets of those trusts. So definitely very powerful stuff. I had a question there. Let's talk about, we'll get into more of that, but let's talk a little bit about the overall enrollment process of getting involved into your classes. I think that, let's talk about what that looks like. I mean, I've gone through that, but maybe share a little bit about what it looks like to become a student of either class and in the experience therein.
Sure. Yeah, we have a website, standingontherock.com, and that's usually where most enrollments happen. It takes you to a third-party payment processor, or Bankwire or whatever. And once somebody gets enrolled, they join the community. There's a new student group, and we kind of do the cohort model, where we'll run for 13 weeks in the equity course or 12 weeks in the trust system course. We stagger them out a bit so that somebody can take both courses simultaneously and not be completely overwhelmed. And you run through the class with your cohort of new students for the 13 weeks, and then you join the alumni group, and you have access to the recordings of the classes, so you can go back and review. You have access to all future classes that we teach for whatever class you sign up for. And you just join a thriving community of people all in various stages of bringing equity to their lives and supporting each other and being trustees for each other and helping each other apply the process. And that's basically what enrollment looks like. It's the cohort model. We do have some pre-recorded modules that we use to kind of supplement the class, but we meet every week live so that people can ask questions, and I'll stay as late as I need to answer all the questions. I mean, sometimes we have real marathon sessions, but that's my favorite part of the class. So, just interacting with the students, answering their questions, and applying the material to wherever their local jurisdiction, their personal issue is. So that's what it looks like.
I think the that idea of the asking questions, it's equity, it's like every person's life is different and every situation's a little bit different, and what they're doing and what they've done and what their history is, and just being able to speak to each person is really important.
Yeah.
I also love the fact that you can keep retaking the class. That's something, as you guys know, I've taken advantage of, and so I really appreciate that. I've lost track of how many times. I think it's three or four times that I've taken the equity class, and maybe one less for the trust class because I enrolled a little later in that, the following cohort. But I can definitely speak to the importance of. I mean, these classes are pretty information dense, information rich. There's a lot going on, and so it's extremely valuable to be able to go back. I also like the fact that each time you give the class, there's a lot of improvements. Sometimes they're just subtle changes, but I've noticed in some cases, seems like significant improvements to how you're even explaining basic concepts. Like you've kind of gone back and refined it. So this probably speaks to the fact that being full-time educators and just being 100% focused on this allows you to, infuse what you're doing with more value. So maybe talk a little more from the perspective of the educator, how important it is, and what are some of the improvements you've already made, and what's your vision for the class to evolve moving forward?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, because this is our full-time profession. Me and Maggie both work on this all the time. We're able to dedicate our full energy to it, and every single series we're adding new things to the courses, just trying to really flesh things out more, to add more ammo to the students' arsenals. I'll give some specific examples. A lot of the people that we learn from really just relied on those secondary source materials like Blacks and Burton's, and there's a couple other books like Levine's Manual or Blum's Contracts. But it's so important to go to the primary source material and really search out the framework for how and why all of this works, because it's so publicly denied and derided even. And you have all these people, like you talked about, sovereign citizens coming to court and misusing things and making it look bad. And so in order to give the students real confidence, you have to show exactly how and why our acceptances, just for example, actually take the obligation that we're being that's being thrust upon us, and put it back on the person that's offered it to us to settle and close the accounting in the matter. And we've actually traced that out through the Bills of Exchange Acts, through the Uniform Commercial Code, through the official commentary on the UCC, and we can take somebody through A to Z exactly how and why that works. And it gets pretty complicated. And there's commercial code is written in a very confusing way. So being able to walk the students through, to answer whatever questions that come up for them as we go through that process of really fleshing out the primary source material is so rewarding for them. There's other things that that are taught very commonly in the Patriot movement. People say, oh, well, if a statute isn't promulgated, then it has no enforcement capability. Well, that's actually not true. That only applies to regulations from three-letter agencies. Statutes passed by Congress or Parliament go through public review as part of congressional hearings and congressional debate, and it's televised on C-SPAN. I mean, that's actually counted as a promulgation process whereby the public is given notice of the law. So we had to search a lot of these things out and really see, is everything that we've been taught really true, and how do we get the best information to the students? With the trust material, there's always new stuff that comes up in trust law. I mean, it's a very actively changing field of law. There's new trust rules that come out every year, case rulings, and you have to really stay on top of that. There's some jurisdictions, like again, California, that don't even see a trust as a separate entity for holding property, and so you have to come up with some very creative solutions for these things. So that's another thing that we've added to the trust series as well. So we're always researching more deeply into these things, and all of a sudden we'll get a student that signs up from Ireland, and they're like, "Is equity even going to work in my country?" Well, yes, it's based on English jurisprudence. We can walk you through it. I mean, the Irish have adapted to their own little configurations for things, and we walk them through exactly how and why it works in their system, and it's one of my favorite parts of the job. Getting somebody from a new country and adapting the material, because it's almost always 98% the same. It's nice to see how really connected we all are, at least legally speaking, spiritual speaking, and that 2% difference. There could be some significant stuff that needs to be adapted. So we're always staying on top of that.
I love the new module approach. That was very well thought. The idea, it actually occurred to me that, in previous classes, a lot of time was spent on that, which is important, going over vocabulary, going over foundations. So when you guys spun that off into separate pre-recorded modules, and then, more core teachings during the live classes, more time for Q&A, which is important, I found that to be extremely valuable. So I just thought I'd point that out. Let's say that we reach a tipping point and this really starts to grow. I mean, how do you envision handling that? How do you, there must be an upper limit to how many students can take a cohort. Like, how do you?
Well,
that could be a good problem to have, I
Right.
guess.
Certainly, but we've already begun training up other equity coaches. We've begun expanding the ministry, hiring people for various roles. Just doing things to ensure that we're ready for the flood of students that God has already told us is coming, and also just kind of getting some of the administrative stuff off our plate so that we have more time for research. So we're actively expanding, we're actively hiring, and it's exploded, and it's only going to continue to traject that way.
You mentioned the modules too, which the pre-recorded modules where we deal with like this foundational material. It's not just supplemental, but really foundational, and it's really even people are getting more bang for their buck basically, because what we're doing is pouring more into that than we could fit in a live class. So Julian's, I call it his ad-libbing. He has a framework of notes that he's working from and definitions and things, but he's able to just ad-lib from the experience that we've had, the students that we've worked with, the cases that we've worked on, and how, this definition applies in real life. And that's just such a valuable thing. And so that's part of, what we bring into, each new class is like, wow, this student used it this way, and this student used it that way, and this is what worked. And we're kind of maybe not doing it that way anymore, and things like that we're just always keeping on top of it. So those pre-recorded modules are just like a class in itself. And then the live class, he does some how to write these notices, very detailed about that. And then it allows the Q&A to be longer. And again, Julian's got this amazing memory, and he's really able to pull on, history and finance and case studies and just, the material itself, and just apply it to that person's specific situation. And it's just an amazing process. And people really stay for the Q&A. And even when somebody's they're talking about, well, that's that person's issue, what am I listening to that for? But it just, every person's situation and how they applied it helps them, and they go, oh wow, okay, I didn't even think of using it that way, or applying it that way, and oh wow, it works that way too. And so it's just an amazing collaborative process that the students are a part of. And I think that's neat. And I think that's why, once you've taken the class, that alumni sit in on it, because they're like, Wow, look at that. Look what we found this time. Look what we're bringing into it this time, and look at these ways to apply it. And then the alumni can also ask questions. So, and the new students learn from that. So,
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of that experience comes out in the court prep and preparing people to speak to authority figures. We've had so many experiences in court, like hundreds of hearings at this point, and I get to see the tapings of the court hearings or the transcripts of the court hearings and have the students relate their experiences. And I just have this massive repertoire to pull from when I'm grilling the other students, getting them ready for court. I mean, we've seen every type of judge there is out there. We've seen every possible response that they can have to one of our questions or to one of our notices or to how things might go in every particular type of case that the students are coming to us with. So we have an incredible repertoire of courtroom material that we really work closely with the students on preparing them for. And again, I mean, if somebody is just totally uncomfortable speaking to authority figures, you are not going to feel that way by the end of the class. This instills you with true confidence that you can carry with you to any situation where there's somebody who's trying to intimidate you or make you scared. They're not going to be able to do that to you anymore. You're going to be able to stand in ways that you never even believed were possible. And as far as the continuing research goes, I mean, there's so many depths to that. I mean, another one is this whole idea of CUSIP numbers and the court's commercial interest in every case. I mentioned this earlier about how courts are trading bonds on the cases, and through the court registry investment system, you can see in actually United States Code how the profits feed back into the courts. I just wanted to flesh that out a little bit more, just to demonstrate how we've kind of gone more into the primary source material. We actually have, basically, it's indirect proof, but it's proof enough. There are investment brokers who are able to access the back end of the Securities and Exchange Commission database. Usually this is done through a user interface, like a Bloomberg terminal. Makes it a lot easier because you can just search it out quite easily instead of having to program it. Basically, if you find an investment broker who's willing to do this for you, they can type in somebody's name, their social security number, and a court case, like the numbers associated with that case account. And then just from that, it'll pull up securities that have been registered with the SEC that are being traded on the bond market and associated with an investment fund. And so why is it that somebody's name, social security number, and case number is pulling up things that are being traded on the open market? Well, the reason for it is, when a court opens a case, I mean, we all know about the appearance bond, obviously. I mean, they don't even try to hide that one. It's in the criminal cases where you have to bail out if you've been arrested and you're making a promise to appear in court. It's called an appearance bond. It's guaranteeing your promise to appear. If you do show up, you get your money back. If you don't, then the court still gets paid. So we all know about the appearance bond, but there's also a bid, performance, and settlement bond on every case. There's state level Miller bonds, and there's different types of local level bonds in each of the various Western countries. But these bonds are actually being generated by insurance companies at the request of the court. The court takes stewardship over the bonds and actually passes them off to an indentured trustee. The indentured trustee in the United States and Canada will acquire what's called a CUSIP number for each bond, which is something that the securities regulators require for anything that's going to be traded on the open market. CUSIP stands for Committee on Uniform Security Identification Procedures, and it basically is a unique identifying number that you can trace that bond as it's being traded. And so this is part of the process to pool the securities inside of a fund. And so the bid, performance, and settlement bonds from any individual person's case will be sitting in this fund with all these other bonds. And then they actually get traded on the open market in like an investment fund that people can invest in and get profit from. And there's actually United States codes about the court registry investment system at the federal level, where you see the profits from these trades being directed back into the court system. They go into the judge's retirement account. They go into the running, the day-to-day operations for the courts and the computer systems and making sure the bailiff's badge is nice and shiny. At the local level, it's mirrors of the court registry investment system, but every state has a different system. And then again, you look up these case numbers and you can see it at the top level, these CUSIP numbers associated with these funds that these bonds are being traded in. So, we've fully fleshed out that whole process. There are CUSIP providers that, the students can go to and look up their cases and see which fund these bonds are being traded in. And we're going even deeper with all of that. I really enjoy kind of searching out the financial mystery to all of this. So, but anyway, that's basically indirect proof, but proof enough that, there are bonds associated with every case being traded on the open market, and the courts actually do have a financial interest, unfortunately, in every case that comes before them. Even something crazy like a murder case, like they're just making bets on it. It's pretty wild. So that's what I mean when I say, where the law feigns, equity subsists. Obviously, in the modern day, under the central banking system, the law has feigned. And so equity needs to come in and clean up the mess and provide the most moral solution for people to, take back their freedom and just be left the heck alone to enjoy their lives and enjoy their families.
And this speaks to the idea of us having each other's backs. So one of the things that I really appreciate about you guys and your just laser focus on this is that means that you're going to have more people's backs because you're bringing that knowledge to bear. I mean, we do need people to do the research, to dive in deeper, so that not everybody has to start from scratch, right? Because you've obviously been able to accomplish a lot. And if you can convey that in a concise way, that's going to be extremely valuable to the student. So that part is really important. You also talked a little bit about the consulting side, and I think this is also important. So when I talk about what we do at the Freedom Studio, I say, well, first and foremost, we're education-based, but we also offer services because sometimes people need a little help. And I like to use the term done with you as opposed to done for you. So we rarely would call it done for you because I never want the client to feel like, oh, we're just handing everything to them. Done with you describes it better because then it becomes more like a collaboration where, yes, you have someone who's more of an expert or an advisor who can jump in and say, well, maybe we need to spend a little extra time helping them prepare for court or set up their trust. So could you speak a little bit, in addition to the education side, could you share a little more about what that looks like in terms of the consulting or services side?
Well, I think too, we've talked a lot about the equity class, but also in the trust class, we call that a workshop as well. And one of the things, and that's for all the students in there, if they want to volunteer their situation, we'll actually take their situation, whether it's their business and family, and a lot of people have different investments going on. Every situation is going to be different, and we'll take their situation and actually map it out for them, and in the class, so that everybody benefits. So that's one way we consult with people. But then there's also the if people want more than what's in the class, and they just have very specific situations, and whatever we do, also do private consulting, and we can also help them with the paperwork that they're because equity can be a lot of paperwork. So
yeah, and I mean, there's all sorts of situations that somebody can come from, and we're going to really tailor it to their personal needs. I mean, the classes give you everything you need to do it on your own, but some people are just on more of a time crunch, or they just want to have the confidence of having some extra eyes on what they're doing. We don't like to hold anything back when we teach. We don't want to be gurus. I really don't hold back at all when I teach the classes. So it is enough just to go through the classes. You can take that and run with it.
Plenty of people do.
Yeah, plenty of people do, and just report their successes back to us. But we also offer private coaching to where we can work with somebody one-on-one. And like you said, it's a done with you process. We're helping them. We might assist them with the paperwork, but they need to finalize it. They need to do the mailings themselves. Really own it. Make it their personal commitment. And we can write trust for people, but of course, the trust system class actually teaches you how to write your entire trust yourself. We feel like there's a real problem in the Patriot movement with people just getting templates and just throwing stuff at the court to see what sticks, buying a trust from somebody and having no idea why it was written the way it was written. It just winds up sitting on the shelf collecting dust, and they don't know how to operate in it. So we really take people through the fundamentals of why we're actually doing what we're doing, so they can really understand every word in the notices that we write, in the trusts that we write, the ministries we write, the PMAs we write, and just completely understand how and why everything works, so that they can step into it in full confidence, use their trusts, their ministries day to day, know how to actually operate in them day to day according to the very best practices that are going to keep their family the safest, and to where they really own what they're bringing to the court or to the CRA, to the IRS, whatever the case may be. So it is very much a done with you process. Yes.
I think too, we sometimes compare it to like kind of alternative health, like the old paradigm, the Rockefeller medicine paradigm is, you go to a doctor who's a specialist and he tells you what to do and you take a pill and that kind of thing. And that's supposed to fix everything. But real health is about, maybe you get somebody that's knowledgeable about something and find out about it, but you take it on yourself. You decide, okay, I'm going to, eat this kind of diet. I'm going to do this kind of exercise, and, I'm going to take care of my own health. We really can't give your health to somebody else to take care of for you. And really, this kind of law, equity law, is the same way. Yes, you have to kind of do it yourself. You have to know, understand what's going on so that you can take charge of your life and your situations. And, if you just give it to an accountant or give it to a lawyer, it's just like giving your health to a doctor, which really doesn't do anything. They're just going to give you a pill. The lawyer's just going to tell you to take a plea deal. The, accountant's just going to, tell you to talk to the IRS. So, if you want to, have freedom, then you also have to have responsibility. And so we really teach people how to take that responsibility for their life, their health, their spirituality, and every aspect of it, really.
Amazing. I've said recently that I think there's like I've put together, there's maybe a few major mistakes that people make with respect to trust specifically. So one, of course, is not using a trust at all. That would probably be the biggest mistake, just passing up on the opportunity to take it. Another one might be trying to be the trustee of their own stuff. Right. And so I think, without getting into too much detail on that, because obviously you guys teach maybe, I would say, a closely protected process that allows people to still control things without being the trustee. But maybe you could speak to the fact that there's like some really crazy mistakes that people make when they get into trusts.
Oh yeah. Yeah. That is so common to see in the patriot movement or the common law movement, where people are just made the trustee of their own stuff. And it's basically it's a complete perversion of the entire idea of a trust. I mean, what it's supposed to be is, a grantor for the benefit of some, maybe the future generations, maybe his grandchildren, whatever the case may be, sets aside his stuff to be cared for by an independent, neutral third party for the benefit of the beneficiaries. And when he does that, there are many, many protections afforded to them in terms of tax, in terms of liability minimization, asset protection. So that all those powers come from trust law, and people try to exploit that by just making you the trustee of all your own stuff. So that way you can control everything and yet still receive all the benefits and powers of the trust. And it's completely against the most fundamental doctrines of trust law. I mean, you can just type in alter ego doctrine, type in self-settled trust doctrine, type in adverse trustee doctrine. Ask AI to just compile a list for you of all the people's trusts that have been pierced because of failing to meet the standards of these doctrines, which say that you cannot be trustee of your own stuff. It is completely adverse to the entire, foundational principle of trust law, which is the fiduciary relationship between the trustee and the beneficiaries, and how the trustee absolutely cannot mingle accounts or have any interest in the stuff. So there's way better ways to set it up. I'm not going to go into too much detail about what exactly that looks like, but we don't make you any of the three major liability-prone roles in the trust of the grantor, the trustee, or the beneficiary. There's other ways to do it. Yes, you still have to fill those roles. We help you with that. But there are far better ways to set these things up that are actually going to stand up if it ever goes to court or if it ever is scrutinized by any kind of three-letter agency. If you make yourself the trustee of your own stuff, yeah, you can set up a bank account with it. You can buy crypto with it or whatever. It's going to work day to day. But the second a judge scowls at it or the IRS looks too closely at it, it's going to fall completely apart. And I mean, again, there's look up those three doctrines I mentioned. You can see tons of cases where that happened.
That's right. I think too, like even students in the class are like, well, I don't want to have a trustee. I don't trust, well, that's what a trust is. So, you're going to have to get your head around the idea that you're going to need to work with a trustee. And I think that's part of, bringing, students of equity into an advanced alumni class, and then David's organization, that we have to find ways to work together. That's what the wealthy people are doing, and so we have to find a way too. And part of the culture and the propaganda that's out there is about separation. It's there's the whole narrative, the dialogue, the belief systems, all are about separation rather than connection. And so we're countering that. We're talking about ways that we can connect, ways that we can trust each other, and ways that we can depend on each other. I mean, how are we going to build communities? How are we going to build generations? How are we going to work together as families unless we learn to do that? And I think that's a big part of it. And understanding what a fiduciary responsibility is. If you give someone, they take on fiduciary responsibility, they can't just, take your money. It's not, that's what the whole document is written about. It's a contract. It's very important. Contract law is everywhere. They say contract is king. So if you're writing your contract right, and you've chosen a person who is morally sound, who's God-fearing, who's, understands what a fiduciary responsibility is. And that's what, David's network is about. That's what we're teaching in our classes, so that we can help each other. A lot of times families can, be each other's trustees, and things like that. So, we have to learn to do that. Otherwise, we're just a separate island out there, and we don't want that. We're trying to bring this community together of people that understand what this is really about.
Absolutely.
Building trust and developing trust is one of the most important things in life. Now, I'll just say the Freedom Studio, we have trustees, and they're not me. And I have a family trust that I've been setting up, and we've hired trustees, and they're not me.
Right.
So, I mean, we can do this. I'm also, as I mentioned earlier, now am and will be a trustee for others. The point is, you can be a trustee. You have to trust yourself, first of all. Nobody has all the answers. We just striving for the highest level that we can achieve. A basic understanding of the fact that, morality is objective. We can agree that there's an objective standard of right and wrong, and we can just approximate that, do the best of our abilities. Again, not everybody's going to always get everything right, but we don't need to, give ourselves a failing grade because we're not always going to get everything right. So, part of it is just, maybe even some self-forgiveness and a little bit of flexibility and just good communication to work things out when there are disagreements.
Right.
So that sometimes we do have to sit down and hash out a disagreement so that it doesn't, blow up into something bigger, and we can all be very reasonable. So it seems to me this is all very attainable. We just need to, put a foundation of good education under it to solidify it. But, I've heard what you guys said about people not trusting people. That, to me, that's just nonsense. How do you get anything done in life if you can't trust
right.
anyone?
That's right.
It's impossible. It doesn't make any sense. But, there's a certain programming. It does make sense because people are programmed, to say or think there are certain things. And a big part of what we're doing is to help them to overcome that.
Exactly.
So,
It's either that or trust an attorney to do it, and they're all in the statutory world. So, and really the horror stories you hear about people's, generational wealth getting tapped is mainly through that.
Yeah, after paying an
route.
attorney hundreds of thousands of dollars
Yeah.
to set up a trust system that does nothing. Yeah, when people say they can't trust others, I mean, I asked them, have you ever driven a car in your life? Because you're trusting thousands of strangers every single time you get on the road to stay in their lines, to not just do something crazy. It's a massive exercise in trust, just leaving your house every day.
Mm-hmm.
So, we all do it. And it's just a matter of being single-minded in your approach to connect with other people, to build together, to stand on that firm foundation of education and legal knowledge, spiritual knowledge, and really work from that common understanding.
And I think just the support network too. It's like, we're all out here trying to apply it different ways, and this is my situation, and thinking, well, what I need to do this, and then you can come into the Telegram group and ask a question, or to the Freedom Network, and figure it out. And we're here to support you. And we all have teams too that are helping in that support, and then all the students are helping to support each other too. So it's just an incredible community of people supporting each other and learning from each other and learning how to apply these principles in real life. So it's just beautiful.
Yeah, we're training up equity coaches. And I know David's training up coaches and trustees and grantors, and we're just continuing to build a support system for all the many people that are coming to us for help. And there's no end to the people that need help with these things out there. So the more it spreads, the more good stewards come along to make sure that people have a firm foundation and a path forward. We're just going to see the benefits spilling to millions and millions of people.
I think about too, that back to that trust issue, think about parents that hire somebody to watch their kids. I mean, that's a trust situation. You have to go, wow, at the trust of that. What's more important than your kids? Your stuff or your bank account is like, superficial compared to that. But you have to find somebody that you trust to watch your kids, and you have to say, okay, that person is a responsible person, a moral person that is gonna do their very best to treat my kids as if they were their own. And that's the kind of person that I believe David is, to be a trustee. He's going to treat your valuable assets, when I say as if it was his own, not like spending it, but he's going to care for it in the way to make your assets safe. Just like if I was taking care of your kids, I would do my very best to have your kids thrive and have a just be wonderful. So that's the kind of people we are, and that we want to be, and that we're attracting. So.
Amazing. I really appreciate that vote of confidence, by the way. And I've really enjoyed the conversation that we've had today. I think we've had the opportunity to flesh out a few really powerful ideas that probably, if for someone who's watched this or listened, even if they just take one golden nugget from this, it could be, a game changer. I've often talked about how when I do my own workshops, I've talked about look for the golden nuggets. So I'm sure we've laid out quite a few here that people will be able to, take for themselves and basically acquire that. So just before we wrap up, and of course, we're going to provide links, to your website with the video so people can easily go and explore and enroll if they want to. We'll make it really simple for them to do that. But just before we wrap up, was there any question that you would have liked me to ask you that I didn't, that you'd maybe want to speak to?
I think maybe, I was just thinking, maybe my favorite thing about this journey, this ministry, this process. And I think for me, just my favorite thing is, people oftentimes they come to us emotional. We get people in tears, just overwhelmed. We call it the domino effect, where one domino fell in their life and then that caused the next one, and that caused the next one, that caused the next one. And they're almost paralyzed and in fear, and it's affecting their families and their kids and their wives. And, we have seen sometimes just a half an hour consult, and they're just like in hope again. And, even just that much time of seeing like, oh my gosh, there's something to reach for that I can do, and I can take responsibility myself. And even that, just a half an hour consult has changed people's lives, much less the class and just the shift. And, to see somebody that came to us that was, they were just carrying the weight of the world on their shoulders, and, that weight's been lifted, and they're just leaping, now, and just going at it. And it's just, that shift is just like, we cry, at that. We rejoice at that. And it's just the most amazing part of it all to me. So that's my favorite thing. That would be
that's great. Yeah. I guess I've said a few things are my favorite, but that really takes the cake. I mean, when you can meet with somebody and really get to the heart of, yes, it's great to help them discharge the case, of course, but when you can get to the heart of what really started the whole issue for them, where things started to take that turn, where the family started to drift apart, and you can work with them and help them find their true identity in God, and who they were really made to be. That is by far, that's what sticks with you. That's really the best thing about it.
Yes.
Yeah. I value and honor that very much, and I really appreciate your enthusiasm. The God coming from within you that's just expressing itself. I appreciate that passion and enthusiasm, which you bring to all of your work. And I think, again, I've been through your classes multiple times, so I can speak to that. When someone's ready to enroll, I'm 100% confident that they're going to have a great experience, when it's the right moment for them. You guys can go to standingontherock.com. That's the main website. If you want to mention you came from the Freedom Studio, or I'm sure Julian and Margaret will ask you how you found out about it. So you can mention maybe you saw this interview or just in some other context. But yeah, I would just say if the person who's watching or listening, you'll know if it's the right moment. So just take action. And on that note, if you guys want to close us out with any final thoughts, I really appreciate you spending time with me today.
Yeah, it's been fantastic. It's been just a wonderful partnership with you, David. And just thank you for this opportunity to speak to you and to your audience.
Thank you.
I second that.
Amazing. And maybe we'll have another conversation. We'll see what people say once they've watched this. So thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Julian and Margaret. All right, we got a little bonus material here for today's discussion. So I'm here with Aaron and Melissa, and like me, they have already taken the Honor with Equity class, and I believe also the second class. Is that right?
Soon to be taken.
Soon to be taken.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So what we thought we'd do here just for fun is just have you guys just share a little bit about your experience taking the class, and then anything you may have achieved as a result of taking the class. So over to you guys.
So our background is we're business owners. 2021, we made a record amount of money. Shortly after going into 2022, we essentially lost everything that we had acquired. We weren't quite following God as closely as we do now. We were depending on ourselves, not reliant on the Holy Spirit, and really taught us a big lesson. We had joined the equity course about a year ago, I think just over a year ago. We came to Margaret and Julian broken. I mean, they had mentioned in their interview that they had spoken with people in just tears, emotional over the overwhelming amount of tax liability, other liabilities that we had in our life that were not really in our control 100%. So that sense of not having control, not knowing what the future holds, possible trouble with 3-letter agencies, as Julian likes to put it. So when we went to them, as Margaret touched on in their interview, a 30-minute consult, a 60-minute consult, that's really all it took to give us complete hope.
Well, I want to add to that. It's beyond what our circumstances were. I mean, a lot of people can experience business failure, and a lot of people can experience a tough circumstance, but our lives were in complete disaster. I was experiencing just crippling health issues, so we were just beyond ourselves on what we could do with our lives. And when we met Julian and Margaret, they go beyond, what can you do with circumstances before you? They teach you who you are. It's very easy in this life to see yourself as a small person with large entities above you and being completely powerless. And that can throw you into hopelessness for your businesses, hopelessness for your life, hopelessness for your health, hopelessness for who you are in your spiritual identity. And I mean, sure, you can find a class that can help you with one of these, but rarely will you find people that can help you with all of the above. Because once you know who you are as God made you, it's very easy to walk in hope and confidence in everything. And I think that's why it's hard for us to speak on it without having a lot of emotion behind it, because it is so powerful. It is very powerful to be completely desperate one day, have a 30-minute consultation, and then be able to have a first step the next day, and then suddenly be in a community of people that can support you, and you're connected, and you have people that can share answers with you, and now you're part of a family. We still are in the Telegram group and the alumni group, and we still can attend the classes, and we find ourselves in these situations where things are coming off of our shoulders, and we had no idea that was even, I mean, massive problems that we saw no way we would ever get out of them, and all of a sudden they're just off our shoulders, and we just rejoice, because it really, I don't think there was ever any other way that we could see that happening.
One thing I really like about this is not only the alumni group. There's over 300 people, 300 members in that Telegram group. So it's a community of support. It's not only Margaret and Julian, daily going in and answering in-depth people's questions, but there's a large community behind it. And what I really like about them scaling this business is they're delegating some of the administrative tasks to a team, which allows them to dig in. They're students of the craft, and they're constantly improving the courses, which as alumni of the group, it allows us to constantly get these updates that they're learning. So it's a progress, and it's a lifetime of learning and advancing in this.
And they're committed to, it's not templates, it's not formulas, it's really unique to everybody's circumstances. It's understanding who you are and what you have empowerment to do, and that if you want to step into the life that every one of us is called to be in, whatever you believe in, this is the way to go.
I often call it being great or greatness or stepping into your greatness. You guys may have heard me talk about that. So I think that sounds like what you may be referring to is like to truly be great, to step into who you came here to be. These courses and this material, in addition to just some practical benefits, is going to offer you a real shot at that. That's what I'm hearing you guys say. So what would you share with someone who, I mean, everybody's circumstances is different. It sounds like you were facing some very challenging circumstances, but someone who's watching this who may be dealing with what they consider to be even worse circumstances or just difficulty, like what would you say to them to encourage them to move forward?
The way that the roadmap is laid out in this course, the equity course itself is 13 weeks. And the way that it's laid out is so clear. And for people that are lost, broken, they can't see a pathway forward, sometimes it's just overwhelming. I highly recommend at least getting a 30-minute consult with them and seeing if it's a right fit. If it is, they do have done with you, yes.
Like helping out with the paperwork,
Yeah.
you mean?
Yep. So Julian and Margaret, they do offer done with you, with the paperwork, getting some of that stuff laid out, and it's up to you to stamp it and then mail it out. But, you got to take ownership on that. You have to learn, the process.
I would say the thing that would stop most people is, and this is for anything in life, is fear, and it's shame. Now think about a circumstance that you might be in, and don't let that stop you. I mean, we looked at our circumstance and we literally thought there's no way out of this. And even with my health situation, I sit here today. I mean, when we were speaking to Julian and Margaret, there were days that I had to have Aaron help me out of bed. I couldn't get my legs to move. And it was the healing and health remedies part of the discussion, and just the power of prayer and knowing who you are. And I mean, it does not matter. Don't look at your circumstance and look at what you're facing. If you want an answer, it's like having a present that's right there. Just open it. Just be bold and take that step and book the call and watch where your life goes from there. Just make that first step. I think about things. We all want the plan. We all want to, like, first I'm going to do this, and then it's going to I have the whole blueprint and I see the resolution, and we never have that. If you can make the first step, watch where your life goes from there. We're living proof of that, and we're still going. Not all of our issues are resolved yet, but we have absolute unwavering expectation because we see it every single day.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing. Yeah, greatness and being on the path is progressive. To be considered successful, it's about being on the right trajectory, not that you've reached the end point. Mm-hmm. I've said, and some of my mentors have said that as well, that there is really no arrival point. It's just a continuous journey. It's just where you're headed.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you guys are headed in a great direction. Of course, we are fellow alumni or students in the classes, so I really appreciate you guys being willing to jump in here and share a spontaneous testimony. So thank you very much for that.
Thanks for
having us. Yeah.